Hello, this is Beadle from Holochain. If you'd like to get in contact with me or find out a bit more about me, please check out my website, philipbeadle.life. In this video, we're going to go into a bit more detail about how to use CRISPR to build a Holochain application and actually build one from start to finish. And we'll spend a bit more time in the modeler looking at the various different functions and how you can use that and what sort of code gets generated and how things actually operate. So, first thing to do is, on the project screen, we want to, let's just close that for now, we will want to add a new one. So, what do you reckon? We'll hit the plus sign, eh? Let's put a new one in here and we'll call that events, because I would like to manage an event, even though we are stuck in lockdown and that's probably not going to happen for a while. Anyway, so we'll just call this an event, managing app. And the zone name is going to be called events as well, and our entry type is an event. And let's give it a nice picture, shall we? Let's go in here and go preview. Yep, that'll do. There we go, got a nice little calendar to go with our thing. Let's hit create. Done. Alright, now there we go. Nice and refreshed, because what happened there, the reason for the refresh was that part of that, that process of creating a new one actually wrote new files into our CRISPR instance, and because we're running it in the Nix shell with yarn, it's got the hop module reload, so it's automatically just like reloaded the page and showed me this new thing, which is cool. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is, let's go and build our DNA. So we hit the braces again, which is for the zome modeler, and here we are again. Let's go and click on the name of our zome. Sometimes the lines don't get drawn quite properly, so just redo that. And here you can go. For our events module, we have the root anchor, so we're going to list all of our events off the one link, and we have a profile as well, which is cool. Alright, now let's have a bit more of a look around. So again, because this is an SVG, you can just like drag things around. It's actually quite good fun. What's really cool about SVG is it doesn't matter how close you get. What do you call it? The definition, or the no, what is it? I don't know. Anyway, there's no pixelization, which is nice. So what that gives us now is this event entry type. And now that we've selected a few things, such as, just come to this page straight up, these little green buttons down here show you the code that is associated with the functions that are associated with this entry type. And this is typically what we would normally call CRUD, create, read, update, delete, which doesn't really apply in Holochain because you can't delete anything, you never update anything, you're just creating new things. But I use these function names because they still kind of work, and that's where we're at the moment. So if you click on the green button here, you'll see the code that actually goes with that particular function. So here we go, create, it's going to create an entry, commit it, and then do a few other, link it to the anchor, etc. And it says here that anyone is allowed to create, which means that part of the validation of was the person who instigated this action allowed to do it is checked here. And again, just look at delete, just to show you the same thing. Right. So now, if you want a bit more information about what's actually going on there, click on the README. And here you have the very similar instructions that are in the support knowledge base as well. But this is just like a gentle reminder. Plus, of course, you've got the help at the top here, and that shows you what all of the different icons do and individual bits and pieces. Alright, so let's go back to the model a bit and let's have a bit more of a chat about this. So here we have the entry type for the event with our fields and our meta fields, types and links and different functions associated to it. Plus we've got our link from the anchor, which means that we could ask this anchor for anything linked off it, and then we can go and find these individual events and do things with them. And same for profiles. So let's have a look at what's actually happening here. So I just want to remind you about the update run. So let's have a look here. Here we go. Function update does something, and it also has validation permissions. So now if we go in here, under our zome, into the code, under source, and as you can see, there's quite a lot of files that have to be in a very specific location, and things need to be done quite, well, like very strictly for Holochain. And the reason for that is that we don't want, everything has to be deterministic. We have to be able to find, we have to know exactly what's going on. And because there's so much code that goes around, generating your code like this makes a lot of sense. So if we have a look at the lib file here, this is the, I don't know, I suppose like the interface that you would be calling. So when your application wants to do something like create a profile, this is the function it calls, passes these things in here, and then that gets handled in this one called handlers. So if we go and look in handlers, we will find a function called create, just here. And this is the one that actually uses the Holochain development kit and actually goes and commits things into Holochain. Right, so there are a bunch of those. There's create, read, update, delete, and list, and rebase is what I'm calling when you move something from one anchor to another one. Now the mod file is where we declare what's actually going to be in the entry. So here we have the entry, it's got a content and UUID string, and that's what gets stored. But what gets returned to the UI is the same two fields, but these extra meta fields as well, which are calculated. So I can show you what that means. If we go to the handler again, and if we go and look at creating an entry, you see that we create an entry from what's passed in, and then we commit that entry, we get that address back, then we are going to get a new event. So the syntax in Rust is like this. So I've implemented this function called new. So if we go and look in the mod, you'll see that this is how you create a new event. So you pass in the address and the entry, and then those things get used down here to get populated, but it also goes and finds a few other things in the headers. For example, the timestamp. So if we go and look at that function timestamp, you'll see here it's using the entry options, and it's using the latest entry. So in case you don't know or haven't heard before, the way Holochain works is that if you give it the hash key or the hash address of the first entry, if that entry ever gets updated, even though you can't actually update an entry, you create a new entry, that original address will point to the new one. So you get like this chaining effect. So you can ask for the entry based on an address, and it will find you, in this case, the latest one. And then what it's doing is it's going into the headers and it's finding out what the actual timestamp was. And the same for the created at, does the same sort of thing. Goes in here, finds the headers, gets the provenances, and returns the created at, which means that then I can give you these meta fields so that you know when things were created, updated, etc., and who did it, and the address. Right, what else should we look at? Right, permissions. So let's scroll down a bit further in the mod. And you'll see here, this is where we define the entry type. So here we're saying that this is an event, and it has links. You can link from it, from an anchor type, which if we go and look at the model again, is exactly what it says here. It says here, entry is an event. It can link from a Holochain anchor, and the link type is going to be an event link. So if we go back to the mod file, that is exactly what is in here. There's the name of the entry, which, just to make sure it's actually up here, is a non-magic string. And then down here you can see that we have the validation, so what to do. So when this entry is created, we need to execute this code. When it's modified, we do this one. When deleted, we do this one. And the same for the links down the bottom here. Now what I've done is the validation, the way I've set it up here, is done in two steps. So the first one is who's allowed to do things, like what is the permission, such as, is anybody allowed to update it or nobody, etc. And then the second step is actually validating the entry itself. Alright, so now we have let's go and look at the permissions. So you can see here it's entry permissions, validate permission, entry create, which is this one here. Validate permissions, entry create. And it says anyone is allowed to create. That's because in the permissions, that's what we've got. So if we go back to here, to the event, and click permissions, and let's say that only the author can update, and no one is allowed to delete. Now what you'll see here is that the delete function is actually gone now. So there's no API interfacey kind of thing for delete now. But that doesn't stop. That's just because somebody can't access it through the WebSocket, which is nice, doesn't mean that they can't attempt some way to try and subvert the system by I don't know. I'm not sure how you could do this, but just to make sure, we have in the permissions that even though there's no function here in the lib, because remember this bit, this is where you actually call from a UI, there's no delete function because no one's allowed to delete. But in the permissions, we've also specified that if anybody does ever try to, in some way, push an entry into this DHT via some other method, it won't be allowed. It won't be allowed in there. You won't be allowed to delete it. All right. So, and the validation. So, all of this code is generated, and the idea with the validation file has a separate step from permissions. Is that not really sure how you're actually going to use your application and what sort of validation you want to do in your entries. So this is a free-form piece of code that you can edit to your heart's content, and it won't be overwritten. So, right, so that is most of the code. We'll have a look at the profile one here. You can see it's very similar. We have the mod, which is the profile, which has your avatar and handle, and these different meta fields in it, and the various handlers for bits and pieces. Some other files that are needed to actually build a Holochain DNA are the cargo, or the TOML file, and this tells Rust where to get all the Holochain HDK and all that kind of bits and pieces from different crates. And then the HC build, this is used in our WASM compilation step. It does a lot of things like vacuuming, which sucks out all this like superfluous code that doesn't need to be there in the final step. A bit like when you build JavaScript and it makes it hard. Cleans it all up and makes it as fast as possible. You have a zome JSON file here which specifies what the zome is, and I think the last big one we need to look at is the package file. No, not that one. Oh, the testing stuff, that's right. So, we've got the app JSON file, of course, which tells you about your event, and then the tests. So, there's no point writing code if you can't test it, so this automatically generates the tests for you as well. And this uses the Triorama testing framework that was built specifically for Holochain. So here you can see down the bottom here that after it's set up the conductor, it is going to run these tests. So let's look in there, entry types, here we go, right. So we can run some tests for creating, rebasing, listing, and author only update, and no one's allowed to delete, so there's no point trying to test from here. But you'll see here, I wanted to show you this one here, the author only update. So what this is doing is we're going to use two different players, Alice and Bob. Alice is actually going to create the event, and then Bob is going to try and update it. Now what will happen there is that when Bob tries to update it, because he wasn't the original author, which is in the provenances of the entry and the headers and things like that, he's not allowed to do it, which means you'll get a validation failed. And an author who did not author is trying to update. And that error comes from entry permissions here. No one is allowed to delete. Right, so what's next? So let's have a look at the other thing on the model, which is the profile. Very similar. It's actually just another event type, another entry type, and so this has got your avatar and handle, and again the meta things, but there's no actual. We don't need to manage the functions here with permissions and things like that because they're the same for every user. Okay, well, we're getting there. Now, what about if we want to change the list of fields in an entry type? So here we've got content and UUID. So if we hit this list here, you can see we've got those two fields. What about if I want to add a new one, such as, I don't know, what's a good thing for an event? Probably a location. Would be good to know where people are. And because these fields are Rust, they need to be snake cased. So if I do stuff like put a space, you see that it automatically snake cases it for me. Got the different types of fields, so that's going to be a string, and we'll say, where is it? Save that field. Also, I want to change this one. Let's change this to description. Description, and save. Right, now when we go done, you'll see that our entry type is now updated. We have description and UUID, and if we go this, which doesn't change any of these methods, by the way, because we're passing the whole object, so it doesn't matter what fields are in it for these particular functions. But if we go and look at the mod file, which is where we define the structs for these, you'll see that we now have this one here. No. What have I done? Okay, looks like I've got a slight issue there, but anyway, we will fix that a bit in a minute. It's not going to affect the video. Alright, so now what we want to do is, let's just come back to this one, come back again, clean up all the changes that we made. So we've got our model, which is back where it was. Right, so we've done the permissions, and we've seen how the different functions get updated, and we've been through all the files on the left here. So we're pretty confident that we've got what we need. So let's just one last look in here. Lib, event, mod. Looks like it's all there. So what we can do now is, let's open up the developer tools, and here you can see we've got the console. Now what we can do is press this button here, and that's actually going to write the files to a local disk. So just to prove there's nothing up my sleeve, I will go and delete all of those things. So Redux, under DNA there is events, so we'll just kill that, make sure it's gone. Now if we go and hit this button here, it's ready to package. That was pretty quick. Let's have a look at that. So now you can see we have the events, which has written out all those files from the tree to hard disk. And now we can run some tests. I found this icon for an airbag. I figured that was a pretty good icon for testing. So let's hit that. That's actually going to run Holochain test, which takes a few minutes. Well, not even a few minutes. It's a lot faster now, actually. The new version of Holochain is significantly quicker than the one from last week. So what this is doing is it's going to build or package the DNA into the zome file, which is actually a base64 encoded JSON file. And then once that's done, you can see it's installing npm, which is the test framework. Once it's installed all that, it's actually firing up the conductor in the various configurations. So you can see here we've got things like Alice is one to do some testing on events. Now there are 7 or 8 tests here, and one of them is going to fail, which is the update one, and that is because of a known issue in Holochain Redux version. So we're not going to worry about that. But you can see you get pretty good feedback from the testing framework, what's actually happening. And there we go. 7 tests passed, 1 failed. I know exactly which one is the failure. It's the update one. Right, so that's all well and good. So pretty happy with the tests. Let's package that. So we'll hit the creation button here. And now that all the Rust crates have been downloaded, this should build a fair bit quicker. Done. Alright, now you can see what it did is it built this file, events DNA dist DNA DNA JSON. Just want to have a quick look at that to show you what that is. Let's go in here, dist, and let's just open this with Visual Studio. And here we have it. So JSON file describes the DNA that you just built, and all the code is base64 encoded WASM. And it's huge, so that's the whole thing. But let's get rid of that. Cool. So now we have built the thing. Let's install it. So when you hit the Holochain button here, what this is going to do is actually install the DNA. Then it's going to create an instance of it, start the instance, and associate the instance to the interface of the WebSocket. All right, that was done. So now we can, yes, just get rid of that for the moment. We can go over here to this button here, which is the UI editor, or the application editor. So if I click on that, you'll see here this is my events UI, and I'm using Vue as a front-end framework. And this is the actual UI for this events module. So if we, and it's actually working. So actually, I'll just bring up the console again so you can see. Let's clear that out and hide that away. Now if we go here and add a broke something. Anyway, the idea is that you can edit an event there and update it here. You can actually change things over here, so I can show you the help working at least. So it says click to start a new bubble. That's not what we really want. No, sorry, that's from the actual list. Anyway, this is supposed to give you editing. I'm not really sure what's going on there. I might go back and have a look at that a bit later. Alright, so that is it building. So now you can write the files to disk, package them, test them, and install them. And I'll have to figure out what is going on with my code here. But there's an update on CRISPR, and there was a massive amount of learning involved in building this. All in all, loads of fun.